Well, William, it's July 5th. It's the July 4th weekend, and welcome to the happy hour, Friday night happy hour. Today, I've got a beer, which I'm usually a wine person, but I got a beer in honor of July 4th and the whole, you know, drinking at the barbecue. Even though it's a Belgian ale, it's not but anyway, whatever. It's a beer. I should be drinking an American beer, but anyway, it's the thought that counts. So, cheers. Cheers to you.
Here's to beer.
Cheers to beer. Cheers to July 4th.
And,
Cheers to Friday. Happy hour. Hallelujah.
and,
Mm.
and what's up, Joann?
Mm. Okay, well, we, you and I have been meaning to talk about a particular topic of gun control. We keep getting sidelined because there's so much going on in the news politically. We keep getting, pulled off our topic course. But tonight, damn it, we're going to talk about gun control because it's a really important topic. Uh, it's one of those issues that just rears its ugly head in the worst way, periodically, and it's not being addressed. So I guess for me, like what I wanted to share on this topic basically is that I feel like I've got a unique perspective on it in some ways because of living abroad and working at a police service. With police service is what it's called, not police force, but police service,
Mhm.
in the Cayman Islands for 5 years, which is an overseas territory, a UK overseas territory. And I actually I wasn't a police officer, but I was in the civilian part of the police service. And I was the only American. Everyone there was either British, Caymanian, or I don't know, some other Jamaican for sure. So I guess I just want to share this because it kind of like showed me, sometimes when you go abroad or you live abroad, you really get a picture. It helps you see your own Americanness in a way because you've got this, you're abroad and you see your own Americanness in a way you can't when you're in the States. Um, so one thing that was fascinating to me was that the police officers did not all carry guns, like not at all. In fact, there was only one small unit of the police service that carried a gun. That was the firearms unit. They were highly trained. They were called in when there was a situation that involved, lethal force potentially or whatever. But the rest of the police, the overwhelming majority, over 90% of the police, did not carry guns at all, ever. Um, so that to me was like kind of a shock because in the States, being a police officer and not carrying a gun is like a pretty, I don't know, be kind of a scary proposition, frankly. And it really made me think about our society and you know, how this need, we're just permeated by guns and this we're permeated by it, like we can't like I mean, it's inconceivable to be a police officer in the U.S. and not have a gun, even if you just do traffic stops, which is part of the problem with why we have so much, issues with traffic stops with police and things. You don't have those issues in other places where the police don't carry guns everywhere. So, these are just my thoughts because it gave me this perspective about, how in other places there's a completely different relationship to guns, completely different. Like in that territory, you were not allowed to have a gun unless the police commissioner himself signed your permit, and he could reject your permit, your application for any reason, and he didn't even have to disclose it. Now, I'm not trying to say that's what we need to have here. That's not my point. My point is there's such a radically there's we if you live in this society and grow up in this society, you just accept that some things are the way they are, and then you go somewhere else and you see how different they can be. So I kick it off that way because it always has made me think about things. Whenever I hear about a shooting here or I hear about other things, I'm just conscious of how it's just not that way in other places. And why is that like that here and so different elsewhere, you know? So anyway, those are my big profound thoughts to get us going on this topic.
So, you say gun control. I, I, I have chosen over the years to talk about gun violence, and that is being the focus of my research and writing and attempts to find policy solutions in
Mm.
that area. It is a and and you know it's something where when you talk about the not carrying a gun. I was a police officer where I was uh, active duty sworn police officer for 11 years and
Oh, I didn't realize it was that
on
long.
two different
Okay.
police departments.
Hmm.
And the first police department required you to be armed at all times. No matter where you went, no matter what you did, you had
And
to
this
be
is in the
armed at
60s,
all.
right?
Pardon?
This was in the 60s. What
Yes,
year?
this was
Uh-huh.
in the 60s.
Yeah.
And the LAPD, where I was for 5.5 years, you were not required to be armed off duty, but many, if not most, officers were armed off duty. So,
Off duty or on duty?
off duty.
Off duty.
They were
Wow.
armed off duty. So everybody was armed on duty.
Of course. Right. Okay.
So, so that was just your second nature. Is that for a decade of my life, I carried a gun. Virtually almost every day, and I was also trained and prepared to use that gun, and guns have been a part of my life for my entire life. I was born and raised in the panhandle of Texas. And when I was 8 years old, I got my first gun. And I was given my little single shot 22
Oh
rifle
my.
and a box of shells, and I went out to see what I could start shooting. And one of the things I had to shoot was that I had a nickel, and I had a leather string, and I wanted to put a hole in that nickel, and I was put that leather string through it, and I could wear that nickel around my neck. And so I took my gun and I tried to shoot the nickel, and I was wasted a couple of shells because I kept missing it. And so I took the gun and I held it up, and I put the nickel up on the top of the barrel, and I held the gun like this, and I shot the nickel, but I raised it up just slightly so it only just sliced my forehead open instead of blinding me. If it had just been an inch lower or two, well, I mean, it was
How
not.
old were you?
I was 8 years old.
Oh, wow.
And of course, what happened? Well, I bumped my head, of course. I wasn't about to tell
You
anyone.
would never admit that, right?
No, of course not. But I always had guns, and and um, and was armed for many years, with guns. And I wrote an article. This was an article I wrote back in 2015,
Uh-huh.
and it is called "Despairing of Gun Violence." And
Hmm.
and and it started off, and that's what made me remember this, is that I received my first gun when I was 8 years old. And I carried a gun for many years during a 45-year career in the justice system. As a police officer, three of my friends were murdered in the line of duty. I saw two armed men shot to death during a bank robbery. I, I, I was almost shot by fellow officers as I was coming out of a bank that was being robbed
Oh,
inside
geez.
as I was coming out. And I faced down, and without killing him, an armed man who had just shot his girlfriend in front of me,
Holy
and
moly.
ordered him to drop his gun
Did he kill
instead of
her?
killing him. I,
Did he
I
kill her?
No, he didn't kill her. She survived and
Oh, wow.
refused to prosecute. But I was criticized for not having shot him,
Ah,
for telling him to
ah.
drop it. That's a complicated story, but
Right, yeah,
but
yeah.
I carried guns, and I've been involved with guns for my whole life, and I understand the culture of guns in this country. I think because virtually everybody I know is involved in this culture of guns, and it's so anything we are going to talk about has to be consistent with that Second Amendment. And it has to be consistent with that Second Amendment that is as currently interpreted by the Supreme Court, because that's the reality we live in. So that's what we need to get to as we're talking about here tonight. But 2 years ago in June, I was in Texas at a large family reunion. The Cox
Mm.
family is one of the largest related families in America. So out there, if anyone is a Cox, there's a good chance that we are related. But in any case, I was there to speak at this large gathering of the Coxes in Texas, and this was just as Uvalde happened, just the
Is that
week.
only 2 years ago?
Yes, that
You
was just
valid? Wow.
that was just 2 years ago, and
Okay. Wow.
in 22.
Okay.
And so I changed my plans and I drove down to Uvalde, and I was there in the week after the shooting, and it was it was just an incredibly wretched experience to be in this small town and realize that 19 children were just taken out of
Wow.
that town, and all of the families and the related families. And I went there with a purpose, though. And my purpose was to go there and take this whole idea that I had put together some years earlier in the article. That was an article on gun violence,
Uh-huh.
and see what could be implemented there in this city to do something about guns generally, the prevalence of guns, and also a way of dealing with guns. And so what came out of my getting ready to go to Uvalde, and the time that I was in Uvalde, and in the weeks after I was there, was a concept that came to be called Texas Brave.
Mm.
Okay, and
Okay.
Texas,
This is a concept you
yes, this is a
generated.
tech.
Okay. Uh-huh.
This is a policy concept.
A
This is a
policy concept.
political policy concept to be
Okay.
implemented by legislation in the state of Texas, or
Oh,
in any of the other 49 states in the United States, can all implement this. And it's sort of, in a way, based upon peace officer standards and training. As you know, in every
oh
state
yeah.
in the United States,
The
we
post.
all have post standards, and peace officers are all are hired and trained according to those standards. And so, but this is a concept in which there's two things that's involved. And one is that, okay, the first thing that is involved is that it is an educational campaign. And it's an educational campaign to help people understand that guns do not make them safer.
Yeah.
By every metric, by every measure, having a gun in the household makes your life more dangerous rather
Hmm.
than safer. And that the whole concept of firearm safety and what can be done with it has to be recognized that it is dealing with a very powerful lobby, just like we were dealing with the environment, and just as we were dealing with tobacco. These are very powerful forces that are trying to tell you that guns are not the problem. And
Right.
and so and that when you say gun control, they say, okay, they're coming to get your guns. So so that's how we have to
Right. Pivot the
not
language.
change it, but let's look at the policy of it. So that's the first thing, is let's have an educational program. But what we need to do is we need to have a way for people to voluntarily surrender the firearms that they do have. Only one third of the households, one third of the guns or households own guns in America. I mean, even though there are more guns in America than there are people, that every household does not have a gun.
So people have multiple guns, is what
Of
you're
course,
saying.
yes, and some people have many, many guns, of course.
Right, right, right.
But so but in order to have a way of showing that you are Texas brave, and what I proposed was that there be a monument erected next to the highway there, where the two highways come together out there, and down there in South Texas, is where these two highways come together. There's an open space there, and that there be a structure built there, constructed of weapons of violence that have been surrendered, a place for people to come and to surrender their weapons. And today, the problem with weapon surrender programs and so forth is that many of them they're collected by companies that do this for the police departments, and they
Right.
strip the weapons down. They take the serial numbered parts and they destroy that, and they take the other parts and they go stream right back out into the stream of firearms. So
Oh,
so this is a way for people to voluntarily give up their guns into a program, and that this be artistic structures, that
right.
there be competitions, and as between cities as to which one can have the most magnificent structure, so that as and your imagination in front of every courthouse in this country, in front of every police station, in every public square, there'll be these monuments that are there and they're rusting over the ages. And people go by and say, Mommy, what were those? And I say, once upon a time, people had those things to kill other people with, but they voluntarily gave them up. So
Mm.
now, what do we do? That's utopian. Yeah, that's
I want to just say something just because it's like actually when I was working for the police service, we had a gun amnesty because there were illegal guns on the island.
right,
And so it was basically like from this time of the day to that time, you can drop it off, no questions asked. And we did a no questions asked campaign. That's what
right,
we call it, no questions asked. And it was actually pretty successful,
right,
uh, because people had guns maybe that they didn't know what to do with, and they knew the gun was illegal because in the Cayman Islands it's super, the rules are really strict. But even in the U.S., you have people have guns they don't know where it can, maybe it's not licensed or permitted or whatever. I don't know what to do with it. How do I get rid of it? What do I do? So it's a practical thing, to have something like that. To just there are people out there who actually don't want them, and get rid of them, take them out of circulation. Yeah. But I love the artistic idea, melting it down, making it into a sculpture,
oh,
something like that.
okay. You're not really melting it down. What you're doing is you're welding them together.
Aha, I
You
see.
just
Okay.
weld
So
them
you can
together
see that it was a
with the
gun.
wooden
Right.
stocks and whatever. You just kind of like just jam them all together into whatever it is, because they're not particularly lovely, to look at. So I mean that's one aspect of it. So what are we going to do though with people who don't want to give up their guns? Now when I wrote the article back in 15, I commented at that time the Supreme Court had ruled in their latest case on guns that they could be regulated. There could be regulations, at that point. So I indicated that is open, and also you got to keep in mind that the National Rifle Association supported all of the laws back in the 20s and the 30s that dealt with firearms, with machine guns and sawed-off shotguns and all of these things. I mean, the
They
National
supported some
Rifle,
degree of
yes, the NRA
regulation.
used to support all of
Huh.
these areas, the registration of firearms dealers, all of these things were all NRA supported legislation. And
So what happened?
well, it became captive by the gun manufacturers.
Uh,
And they are the ones who really, in a way, support the NRA. It has its
right.
members, but it's the money that the gun manufacturers pour into it through trade shows and all of the other ways, through advertising. They constantly are buying big advertising in their magazines, and so the NRA really became captured by the money of the gun manufacturers, because the gun manufacturers not only make guns for Americans, we export guns all over the world. So the gun problems, the gun violent problems that is being experienced around the world is can be traced back here to a certain extent. So that's another aspect of this.
Yeah.
So you say
Follow the
okay.
money.
So you say okay. Well, that's well and good. But let's see what can we do for these people who own guns. Um, so let's look at the Constitution. When the
Yeah.
Bill of Rights was written, in you know, and the Second Amendment was added into it. It was really a matter of militias, that the
Right.
states had the right to establish militias. That's really what it's
Against
all
tyranny.
about. And if
It's
we
all about
and
the
if and
tyranny.
if
Yeah.
our originalist Supreme Court justices would look at
Ah,
the origin of that law, of that Second Amendment, they would clearly see that because, I mean, it was almost immediate. Congress passed a law that defined all of that as to who had to have a gun and so forth and so on. This was all supported by laws, and that is still the law of this country. The official militia of this country is established by law of every people.
so let me understand what you're saying. Let's clarify for myself. So you're saying that the Second Amendment, when it was written and put into the Constitution, that the idea of it was that the militia would have these guns. It wasn't the idea of it,
No,
or the
no,
purpose of
no,
it was
no,
not that everybody.
no. That's no. It's not that the militia would have the guns. Every individual was required to have a gun, and they had to have that gun in good working order, and they had to have a certain supply of powder, and ammunition, and they had to show up regularly for drills and to demonstrate their proficiency with their weapon. And that's the essence of a militia. So Texas Brave, how about this? If you voluntarily register your guns, all of your guns, you register them
Right.
all. And actually, Texas has the highest registration rate of any state, by the way.
Yeah. Uh-huh.
And you register your weapons, and you become licensed to carry and operate those weapons, and go through the training that is required and so forth.
Right.
You become a part of the Texas militia.
Texas
Every
Brave.
state has a militia that is composed of their gun owners who will register their guns, and who will undergo the necessary training to be competent to own them and to have them, and to be open about this. I mean, this is an open thing that you do. It's a voluntary thing. If you don't want to do this, you don't have to. You can go up there with your 100 guns and your gun vaults and all of the stuff that you want to do. You can do that, and you're not the laws and regulations is not going to really change regarding your status at all, except in this regard. Okay, first off, there is a there is a there is a let's say that there is a no fault insurance program in effect in your state, in Texas, no fault insurance. If you are a member of Texas Brave and your weapons are all registered, and you yourself are licensed to own and operate those weapons, and that weapon is discharged, there's basically a presumption that you're not negligent, and you're covered by no fault insurance by statute. But let's happen. What if
But
you?
what if you discharge it in the like commission of a crime or something?
Well, then it's only a presumption.
Oh, presumption, right. Okay, exactly. Okay.
You see what I'm
Okay.
saying? It's a presumption.
It's a rebuttable presumption,
It's a
right? Okay.
rebuttable presumption, but it works the other way also. If you refuse to register your guns or demonstrate your competency, or to undergo the training necessary to operate them, and there's a something that happened, there's a
It's
reverse
a presumption
presumption.
of
There's a
negligence.
presumption of negligence, and you're not covered by the insurance. Now, how do we pay for this insurance? Just a little tax, not a tax. I didn't want to call it a tax.
A fee?
No, no, it's like the penalty assessment. See, that's how they got away with paying. Okay, because under the peace officer standards and training programs in every state, that the training cost of peace officers, in fact, their salaries while they're undergoing training, is being paid for by an assessment on all of the fines that are being paid in that state, including traffic tickets and everything else. So that's the PA that you often see on the
Right.
ticket.
Yeah.
That's what that's all about. And so what you would have is, instead of a penalty assessment, what you would have is that you would have just an assessment on a violence assessment. In other words, this
Huh.
weapon that you're dealing with here, this weapon that you're buying, the ammunition that you're buying, everything that you're buying that is associated with that firearm has an assessment, because there's a potential of violence in it. It's made for violence. It's for, it is sold, it is advertised for that purpose. It is to be used for violence. And so therefore there is an assessment, a violence assessment. It's like when you buy a battery, when you walk out
Yeah.
the door of the battery, you're already paying the
Recycling
return,
assessment or
the,
whatever.
the, the
Yeah.
return on the battery. So
Uh-huh.
so there's like an assessment, a violence assessment on that, and on all video games that have gun violence, on all movies, all
Oh,
television shows, everything that involves gun violence or guns used violently pays an assessment.
wow. Huh.
So it doesn't have to be a whole lot. So ordinary guy, buying his ammunition or his gun or so forth, it wouldn't be all that much. But if you're putting out a multi-million-dollar movie that has gun violence in it, you're going to be paying an assessment on the cost of that movie.
And that goes to pay for this insurance.
Pay for the insurance. Yep. And
That's
to pay for the insurance and education and information, because that's the first part of it. In other words, the first thing
right.
we
Yeah.
started
Yeah.
with was an information campaign. And so to fund the information campaign and to fund the insurance, then you have this assessment. And so that's basically the program that we came out of Texas Brave.
Oh,
Now,
it's interesting.
that
It's a very interesting proposal. Hmm.
this is what I wrote for Texas Brave. Uh, well, maybe I don't want to read this. Uh, but I did. Oh, there is this one other element of it I have to talk about. Okay, here's this. Just as one Texan must trust that the driver of the approaching truck on the other side of the endless double yellow lines that narrowly divide thousands of miles of long and lonesome rural highways,
The
while
10.
closing at 150 miles an hour within 1 degree and 1 second of head-on certain death, in parentheses, is legally responsible, licensed, registered, insured.
Huh.
Brave Texans must also be able to equally trust that the person bearing a firearm in their presence and that of their children is not a danger to the community. So oh, here, this is actually what I was going to look for. A gun doesn't grow a boy into a man, nor does it make a Texan brave. When used by boys as destructive toys in make-believe games of violence, guns allow cowards to become bullies and troubled kids to become crazed killers who act out make-believe games without hope or future, labeled as evil and prosecuted for capital murder. These lost children cause unaccountable carnage that cannot be compensated for, and they inflict unimaginable terror on other children. Checking out with their own personally designed signature blaze of glory, These young people can now live stream their escape from the insanity of the culture of gun consumerism they were born into. This insanity results from purposeful corporate advertising and political corruption that promotes a senseless culture of fear, intolerance, hatred, retribution to generate profits by selling more guns, which produce less security. To repeat this cycle endlessly is the very definition of insanity.
Hmm.
Okay.
Wow.
Now,
Passionate stuff there. Very
well,
powerful.
that was what I wrote. That was what I wrote in 22, 2 years ago in Uvalde.
Yeah.
And like I say, that was nothing came of it at that point. I mean, except that I had the benefit of the effort. I mean, I developed this whole concept in a more complete way and wrote it up, at that time. And then last year, President Biden announced that he was opening a White House office on gun violence prevention.
Yes.
And so, and he announced who the leaders of that effort were to be. And I looked them up, and they seemed to be fairly reputable people. And
Mm-hmm.
so I sat down and I wrote up a policy position paper on gun violence in America,
Right.
and I based it on what we just talked about from the Uvalde experience,
Mm-hmm.
the Texas Brave concept, but developed it into a complete program, and 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 I printed it up,
Yeah.
and I put it into uh, overnight packages so that they would be personally delivered to the White House to these named individuals. And I did that back in January, and I have yet to hear from them. But again, I've had the benefit of my efforts on the subject. But to me, it remains a way of dealing with these problems within the Second Amendment. So that's about what I have on the subject. Are you still with me?